Let's see. We are live. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning as we discuss all things tomato with Scott Daigre of Tomatomania.
Hey,
Scott,
good morning.
good
Good morning.
morning. Hi, and we have Conor here at the nursery. I'm uh, live streaming from at home. We have a few people turning in. Hi, Catherine. Thank you for saying hello. Um, Connor, why don't you start off with how you and Scott even got to know each other and your friendship history?
Uh, I'll try and make this very short, but originally when I started at Mini Farm Box, Scott and I did a collaboration at Tomatomanias where we sold Mini Farm Box at his events. And we didn't just become like business associates, but became very good friends over the time. So we've probably known each other, I'd say, over 10 years at this point.
Easy 10 years. Easy 10 years.
It's
And
impressive.
I think we probably could remember back a little farther than that if we tried, right through Hortus in those days. But anyway, it's obviously been a nice thing.
Yes, for sure.
It is. So we've had people send in questions in advance, so let's just, dive right in. Scott, one of the big things, and we were just discussing this a little bit before, is the heat. I mean, we battle with the heat in Los Angeles all the time, and especially this week, it's getting upwards of 90 plus degrees. And we have people asking, do I need to be shading my tomatoes? What is your thoughts on that? What are ways that I can protect my plants during this weather?
Well, it is hot. It's summer. Hi, everybody, and thanks for tuning in. Yeah, it's all the other weird thing for us is it's been very sudden. We've had a very cool, wet, really odd springtime, and now all of a sudden, yeah, it decided to be summer. I spoke with a friend of mine who's growing in the San Fernando Valley yesterday, and she was putting cheesecloth over her, or not cheesecloth, shade cloth, row cover, sorry, over her cages, like in the garden. And I think it's a great idea. It's going to be hot. No tomato needs to, I think we're in Ojai, where I am. I think we'll get upwards of 100 degrees today. So nobody needs that. It's a good idea to manage it if you can, any way you can, whether it's an old umbrella or shade cloth or cheesecloth or anything you got. Regular old shade cloth that you use for canopies works as well. If you can pull some of the heat off, the tomato will appreciate it, especially if you've got a garden that gets, sunset to sundown kind of sun. It's just, we're after 6 to 8 hours of sun. If you want to limit it or protect after that, it's a really good idea, and that's one way you can manage the heat. Conor, we were just talking about temperature, and what's important there, and how, when do you have to worry? And generally, after reading and checking in on a lot of things over the years, generally we know that over 90 degrees, and I think for us and for some varieties it's a little higher, tomato pollination doesn't happen as regularly or easily as it should. So you can, do everything else correctly, and the weather heats up, and boom, you lose flowers, and you don't get, obviously, that fruit. So yeah, it's something to worry about, and not worry about, something to defend against. How's that? Because we're going to get it, and we get it everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to say, in my experience of growing tomatoes, the cherry tomatoes seem to be more resilient in the heat than the bush tomatoes.
I think you're right. I think you are right, Conor. They're the closest to the species, and not all of them, obviously, given breeding and that. But many of them are the closest to the species, and so they will be toughest, and often really really tough as the season goes along. The other thing too is that they're small and they hide under leaves, so they don't sun scald often the way that a larger tomato will, and so that's a good thing.
Yeah, interesting. So it's funny that you mentioned hiding under the leaves, because a lot of people ask me about pruning their tomato bushes to take the non-flower producing branches off. And, in my own growing experience, and it's just anecdotal for me, I've never really pruned the tomatoes because I find that the tomatoes in general do tend to hide under leaves to get the shade. And if you prune them, you're exposing them to the full sun, which isn't necessarily a good thing for them. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's a strategy question, because you and I and each of us and all of us grow in different areas. So the whole idea, first of all, if you want to prune a tomato and cut off an errant branch or whatever, it's your garden and you should do it. That's the first rule.
So true.
You take care of what you need in your space. And no, it doesn't hurt the plant and all that. It's pruning, it's pinching, whatever you want. Make the plant work the way you want it to work. Now, stepping back, if and I mentioned earlier, I did a diatribe on Facebook yesterday about where you grow and what it means in terms of pinching and pruning. If you have a beach grower, somebody who grows at the beach or with great beach or coastal influence, we advise them to pinch a little bit more because the temperate situation there is often trouble. So in order to handle that, we say, hey, pinch a little bit more so that you get more heat on the inside of the plant, right? That works. It works to help people at the beach or in cooler situations to grow a good tomato or grow a larger variety of tomatoes because they can move that along. I'm in Ojai. If I cut or prune or pinch too much, those tomatoes sit in the sun all day and they scald. There's a blister there. The fruit is perhaps ruined. It's just not a good idea for me to be too aggressive. Now, can I take license and cut what I want? Of course. But you just have to keep in mind where you are, what you're doing, and what your goal is. If you pinch heavily, right, you're gonna pinch off a lot of the branches that are gonna bear fruit. So do you want a lot of fruit, or do you want as large a fruit as you saw in that picture when you bought the tomato? Because if you pinch more, you'll get fewer fruits, but they'll be bigger. If you let all those branches grow, right, you'll get more tomatoes, but they probably will be a little bit smaller or not exactly that huge beefsteak that maybe you wanted. For me, my strategy is I want lots of tomatoes. And because I grow a lot of tomatoes, I don't pinch a lot. It's a lot of work. That's the bottom line.
I guess I'm just a more is better kind of guy.
Well, I'm right there with you. And look, we've all got, and I should say, now we're at home and all we've got is our tomato plants. And I think a lot more people will pinch this year than ever. But we're going to learn, and I think that's a great idea. I often say, hey, I'd rather be at the movies on weekends and not pinching tomatoes. But because we can't do that right now, you bet I'm going to pinch some tomatoes. And I will just do it a little, I won't do it so aggressively. And we didn't even go to the mechanics of what you're pruning or pinching. But if I can do that with you guys, and it's, 3-4 weeks into a plant, it's often hard to figure out what the main stem is versus a side stem. But take a look. Get in there in the bottoms and on the inside of the plant. Identify the main stem. And then what you will see is growth everywhere a leaf starts or everywhere a leaf is. You'll see growth coming out of that union or the junction where it hits the main stem. That's the part that becomes a branch. And if you want to keep your plant thinner, more manageable, all those things, you take that off. And I posted a picture on Facebook. I'll follow up on mine and I'll make sure that you guys know about it too. Because it's mechanics and people have a lot of questions about this. So we want to do it right. We want to give you the option to make a decision that is right for you. And so it's basically pruning side branching or pinching side branching. That's what this exercise is about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So one of the questions that came up, 2 questions, is Beth Kohler, asked, hi, can I transplant my tomatoes to larger pots now and use shade cloth, or should I wait until it cools down? So I think this is, goes hand in hand with
you guys can answer that one. You guys know the answer to that question, right? It's hot. So yeah, if you can wait. However, if you transplant a small tomato, you do it correctly. You don't, tear the roots apart as you're doing it. Make the transplant, water it in well, and put the plant in the shade for a few days. I mean, that's what you really can do. A container gives you that flexibility. It's one of the reasons why we like growing in containers. So, yes, I would shade it either, put something above it, or I'd move that container into a place where it can just kind of get resituated for a few days without having to face this high heat.
Just a quick question for you, Scott. From my own point of view, I have never, ever had success transplanting a tomato once it gets over maybe 2 feet high.
No, I wouldn't mess with that. The question was about, I assume the question was about a small pot. And so definitely if it's manageable, you're right, Conor, the minute the thing gets, 2 feet tall, 3 feet tall, it's got a good big old root system that's going to be hard to sort of manage effectively and easily as you transplant. So yes, I wouldn't try to do a big one. And if you can, you have to do it really gingerly. I've seen people dig a hole, place the pot and the tomato in a hole and then cut the pot away if it's plastic, right? Like you would a bougainvillea or something like that, right? That has tender roots. That can work. But yes, as it gets bigger, you're less and less able to do it successfully or reliably.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Transplanting, absolutely. One of the biggest questions we get here, as far as any plant really, but specifically tomatoes, is watering. And we, love and hate this question because it's not a simple answer. People want to know, tell me exactly what time of day, tell me exactly how often, like what is the schedule? And we have to say, like, it's just not that clear cut. But we do also know that with tomatoes, they do like regularity. So do you want to kind of answer this broad question as best as you can?
How do you water those tomatoes? Well, it's especially important right now. I mean, obviously, as the plant grows, as the roots get more extensive, water becomes more and more important, not less. It becomes more important because it governs the fruit, and that's really important. So you got two worlds. You got the container world, and you got the in-ground planting, the farmer planting, right? Some of us do both. Some of us are doing one or the other. Matters not. In a container, you're always going to water more because that's just the state of the art, right? You've hopefully created a perfect soil that drains really well. That translates to quickly. The roots get soaked, and the water drains out of the bottom. That's what a container is designed to do, and hopefully you're seeing that kind of action in the garden right now. In the hottest part of the summer these days, I'm gonna end up watering every day. That's just how it goes. Stepping back just a bit, a minimum size for a container or a pot to grow a container in is about 15 by 15. The larger you can do, the larger it is, the better you'll do because you have more real estate, soil, that doesn't dry out as quickly as a smaller pot. So use a large pot. Yes, you'll be watering more than you want to in hot periods. That's just how it goes in containers. It's better in a container to try to maintain some sort of schedule that allows moisture in there all the time. Not soaking wet, just some moisture. And then in the ground, it's a little bit different, and in some cases a lot different. In the ground, you want to water deeply but infrequently. So you provide consistency in the ground by creating a well of water underneath that plant that the roots can access anytime they need it. Whether it's hot or windy or stressed or not, you sort of create a well underneath that plant. When the tomato is small, it doesn't take a whole lot of water to soak a root ball that's in a 4-inch pot. But as the season goes along, when you water, you have to water more because the roots are growing. You want to soak that root ball at 1 week, at 3 weeks, at 3 months, and until you get fruit. So deeply and infrequently in the ground is always better because the plant does not need to be in a swamp. Now, Sam, you mentioned everybody's got different needs, and of course, we do our potting soils, our potting mix is different, our soil is different. You really do have to evaluate your situation. So if I start with a 4-inch plant, I want to water it well, and then I want to watch it for a few days. I might even, dig in the soil around it to figure, where the roots are when the baby's small. So dig in the soil, figure out where the water is and how quickly it's going away. If you have more clay in your soil, it's going to hang on to it. If you have a rocky or a sandy soil, you're going to need to water more. And a lot of people are growing in raised beds these days, which are kind of a hybrid between a pot and the soil because it's so much more space and so much more, again, real estate. But I think you got to watch what's going on. You gotta make the decision for your own spot. But in the ground, deep, infrequent is best for tomatoes. That's what they want.
I'm really glad you brought that up because that creates great clarity for people. Because I always have found, and I always tell people that if you're growing in a container, you're probably better off watering much more regularly, but not saturating the plant. Because in the containers, they tend to dry out much faster. And I've also noticed that if you let the soil dry out too much, I mean, if it goes drier than a wrung out sponge, it's very hard to rehydrate the deeper roots in the container.
It can be. Potting soils sometimes don't cooperate so well, right? And you don't want to be rescuing your plant all summer long. The idea is not to let the thing be weeping over on the side and then give it water so that it comes back. Then the plant's just, surviving. That's all it's doing. we as farmers have to create some semblance of regularity there that, that allows the plant to perform the way it's got to. And it can't, like I say, it can't just be surviving. So hopefully you've put a great potting mix into your containers. You've added a lot of amendments and compost to the soil. All that helps you retain water and provide some nutrient too, probably. But you want to again, pots more often, in the ground, deep and infrequent. But do your homework. We've got lots of time right now. Get in the soil, see where the water's going, and don't water again in the ground if it's nice and moist. The plant wants to be on the, it doesn't need to be wet. It wants to be on the dryers. So that's how you do that. And have you guys heard like funny stories about how people get water deep?
No.
No, like apparatus or this and that, because it comes up a lot, and I think it's kind of fun. Sure, you can water with the hose. Yes, you can use a soaker hose and all of that. But many people are actually sinking, vessels. It's like kind of like an Oya of old, right?
Yeah.
Where you sink a vessel, a 5-gallon pot, an empty pop bottle, whatever it is, sink that with holes in it. My grandfather used to use a coffee can, and between plants, he would sink a large coffee can. Do we even have coffee cans anymore? Anyway, he would use an ice pick, and I used to help him with this and make holes in the coffee can and sink a coffee can between tomatoes in a long row. And when you water, you fill the coffee can, and the water seeps out nice and deep. You're not watering weeds. You're really avoiding a lot of weed growth, and the plant gets what it needs. So whether you're using PVC pipe or whether you're using, again, a recycled plastic, Coke bottle or whatever it is, just getting the water deep is the exercise. I even midsummer, I'll dig a little divot. I'll just take a soiled divot out between plants so that I can put that hose right down where it needs to be. And there you go. So figure out a way to get the water deep and slow, and your in-ground tomatoes will certainly appreciate it.
Absolutely. We've gotten a couple questions in this period about one from Daniel that was a peacock that you heard, by the way. Jennifer Newfield Wenger asked, could we talk about tomato pests and also soil health, because I think, we talked about this. We could go so deep into all the pests, and there's certainly some
next week.
Exactly. We'll have some hit lists of the common ones, and to talk about all of the solutions and all the things that could go wrong. What it all boils down to is healthy soil. That is one of the ways to really combat pests and disease within your tomato plant. Because it's another question we're getting from Nancy Copcho Rogers is, how often should you fertilize the tomato plants? What do I do for prevention and treatment? So can we just kind of talk a little bit on your experience with this tomato plants?
Well, it obviously is a big topic, and it's a big question, and we're going to all have issues with it. We will. Whether it's a pest that flies into the garden and does something, or it's something unseen that is making our plant wilt, or otherwise it's all over the place. The first thing that everybody needs to remember, and again, Sam, thank you, and back to soil health, is that if you do the work in the ground, if you are always adding to your soil, if you're always enriching your soil, it takes care of itself, and it takes care of a lot of this problem. Not only because the soil is healthier, but because the soil is available to feed the plant, and the plant is healthy. So you have both of those things, going on. So composting and aerating and all these things that need to happen in soils, it's a good thing. Whether you're doing a tilling method or you're doing a no-till, lasagna method these days, just always adding, first of all, sets the plant up to be healthy and great. What bug does a plant what plant does a bug go to first? The one that's ailing. They know. A plant that's failing or a plant that's not doing well will always attract insects that can prey upon it further. And that's just Mother Nature. And so if you can keep everybody super healthy, you will avoid some of those pests. Now, pests are kind of seasonal. So if we, let's say, for instance, you'll get aphids early in the season. That's generally what we see. Spider mites, and boy, it's a big problem these days, often happens in the hottest back end of the season, while we do see other appearances. Hornworms can happen early. They can happen late. They'll happen whenever. You just have to be, as a farmer, you have to be, number one, aware of what's going on in your garden. Number two, aware of when something looks different, and then try to figure out what's going on, if it's a pest that you can actually see. Early in the season, where we are now, and it's been wet and weird and cool, and if you're in Southern California, You might have fungal issues that you will never see, but they'll end up being black spots or, 100 things in the garden that's going on. And often we never know what's going on with that. So, given our season, spraying with a fungicide, whether it's organic or something else you have in the shed, I would do it. I think it's a great idea. That's a good prevention because you can't see what's coming, right? And so it's an interesting exercise. We had big fungal issues last year. I've already used fungicide probably 3 times on some small tomatoes that are in the garden. So prevent. Start with a healthy plant. Yes, Sam, it starts with the soil. Always be adding to that. Make the plant as healthy as it can, and it will fight off a lot of this stuff. And there's 100 remedies.
Just a thing I found very effective myself is if you use raw unpasteurized neem oil preparation, if you spray your plants once a week for the first 6 to 8 weeks, it almost acts like a prophylactic against pests and disease. What I get in my yard is a lot of cabbage moths, those pretty white butterflies. They lay eggs under the leaves, and then pretty soon you have a little worm that's eating through the plant. I get hornworms. Little known fact is they lay the eggs at night. It's a moth that lays the eggs at night, so you don't really see them. But I find that if I spray once a week for the first 6 to 8 weeks, the eggs or the larvae can't live on that plant. It was a very interesting discovery for me.
Well, it's true, and if you're dealing with hornworms, which many people do, it's very, very hard to kill a hornworm that's 2.5 inches long. You got to get them when they're small. So all of this really relates back to do the work at the beginning of the season. Get the soil right. Pay attention. Yes, put a fungicide out there if you know you've had fungal problems, no matter what it is, because again, we're not scientists. We don't know sort of what piece of that puzzle often attacks us. And there again, with the pests and stuff, you just have to be aware. And Sam, getting to the next question, transitioning there, if you have like an aphid problem, you know what aphids want? Aphids want super succulent, moist, fast growth early in the season. Roses, you know this. Roses grow really fast because we fertilize the heck out of them, and then all those new buds, the aphids just come and attack. Well, the same thing happens with tomatoes if you're over fertilizing. So again, back to basics. Get the water right, get the fertilizer right, get the soil right, and you will avoid potentially a lot of these problems. With fertilizing, Sam, there's always 100 ways to do everything. Both synthetic and organic, you can find it all. And you'll find remedies, you'll find old wives' tales, the farmer's almanac, whatever. Why not? It's good. If it doesn't hurt the plant, it's all good in terms of fertilizer. One of my more educated horticultural friends talks about food is food for plants. So it doesn't matter, what, as long as you're giving it something nutritious, it will use it. It doesn't have to be specifically formulated. Some people choose to use very specific fertilizing. Sam, you mentioned a fish head and all, the kind of home remedies or whatever, sure, that's all out there. If it doesn't hurt the plant, it can be good. Epsom salts, on and on and on. An egg, whole. There's 100 of them that we hear about. And look, again, if it doesn't hurt it, it might be able to help, and that's a good thing. With a fertilizer, however, the easy version of all that is companies that we trust have created fertilizers that are formulated for tomato plants or for vegetables, right? It's a tomato veggie mix. Or even an all-purpose. It's very close. Know what you're doing in terms of the 3 numbers on a fertilizer nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, right? So that you have everything the plant needs, right? And then act accordingly. When people come and see you at the nursery, you guide them as to you need this fertilizer now because it's got more of this or more of that. That's great. A good balanced fertilizer, however, is good all season long. It should be applied per the directions. It should be applied religiously. The biggest problem with fertilizer?
What is the biggest problem?
People don't use it. They buy it, they put it in the garden shed, and there it sits. There it sits until Christmas, right? And so what's really important with fertilizer is that you use it, that you get it out there. I often tell people, especially if you're growing in containers, don't hide your fertilizer in the shed. Put it right out in the mix. Put it right next to your pots. That way you'll remember. Here again, you got 2 different worlds with fertilizer. Containers, we talked about the fact that they lose water more quickly. They're draining fast. Well, in containers, you need to be fertilizing every 10 to 14 days. not every 6 to 8 weeks, like it says on the container, right?
My tip for people is if there's cobwebs on your fertilizer bag, you are not using it often enough.
Yes, that's the truth.
Get it. If you are, they will use it if it's out there. So whether you use, again, a very specific something that your grandfather told you to do or whatever, or that you read in a whatever, all that's good. The idea is to do it. So again, in a container, you'll need, along with more water, you'll need more fertilizer in there, right? Because again, the fertilizer's going away with the water that drains through that pot every 10 to 14 days. In the ground, generally most really well, or except if you haven't done your job composting and adding nutrients to the soil, then I'd say, do it every 4 to 5 weeks. If you're also growing more late season tomatoes, and we haven't really addressed that at all, but if you want to grow that, and most of your crop, you want it to be big heirlooms that are going to come at the end of the season, I would do every 4 to 5 weeks to keep that plant going. The plants get beat up during the season, especially when it's this hot. So I would baby them a little bit more.
It's interesting because we have an awful lot of brand new growers come to the nursery right now.
Absolutely.
They've never done this before.
I love that idea. That's so exciting.
I feel like there's an expectation that they do everything at one time and then leave it alone and it'll do its job and then they'll come back later and get the tomatoes. And so what I say to people is every living thing needs a little bit of love all the time or it won't love you back. So
well, it's important. And look, sure, sometimes you get lucky, right? You put a tomato in the ground, it finds what it needs, and doggone, you get fruit, and that's great. However, gardeners, and it's a good point about first-time gardeners. Often a first-time gardener gets out there in fresh soil that hasn't been, decimated by other vegetables or other, and they get this great, amazing crop. But in future years, what happens? The tomatoes and everything else has stolen all the nutrients out of that space, and they expect the same result, and they don't get it. Thus, back to the soil. You have to always be enriching. So yes, in a first year you can often have great success, but know that there's a program here. Know that not all of these will do well, and not all of your gardens will perform well given your space if you relax in the basics. Correct water, correct fertilizer gets you great fruit at the end of the season. So that's important. And there you are.
We had a question from Joanne Schilke-Limmer about, can you plant other veggies under tomatoes? And maybe this is something that both you and Conor can talk about as far as your experience and techniques that you've used before.
Conor, what do you do? Yes or no?
Here's what I say to people is, a tomato bush gets man size, and I mean Shaq, not Danny DeVito. So what happens is that plant's going to get 6 or 7 feet tall and 3 or 4 feet wide. What I've had success with is if you grow something immediately when you plant a small tomato seedling like basil, it'll tend to grow with the plant. So it's big enough not to get shaded by the time the plant gets big. But if you have a big tomato bush, very few things will grow under complete shade. And it's probably not a great idea to start planting things under a tomato bush once it gets big.
Well, it's a good call, and I guess there are a couple things to think about. You point out really good. Just the siting is important in terms of what that other plant is going to get in 2 months. A little 4-inch tomato makes no shade, but a 4-month old tomato, that makes big shade. So yes, there's the environmental sort of thing to think about, and there's obviously the root competition. So you have you plant something with aggressive roots next to a tomato. Now you got 2 aggressive roots, trying to make it work. So I think there are a couple things that I try to do. I know that everybody wants to use their space effectively, and all of us don't have plantations where we have huge acreage in which to grow, stuff and everything we want to eat. So I think what I try to do is grow things that want the same condition next to tomatoes. In other words, that deep water, right? I'm not going to be watering them every day because I don't want the tomato roots to get water every day. Thus, I'm going to plant herbs, onions, bell peppers, I'm going to plant just things that can deal with the same condition. Now, granted, you may have a plant that's going to get shaded eventually, but figure out how your garden is situated so that that plant you're using or planting in the middle will get sun a little bit down the line, and that's fine. So I'll separate my garden into those that need more water and those that don't. Corn, celery, those kinds of things, they want a lot of water. You know, they're going to be on the other side of the garden so that they don't impinge on the tomatoes. Now, there's also a combination of large versus small that I will generally try to do. I'll grow tomatoes, and I have pictures all over from the last 3 weeks of radish and arugula growing under my tomatoes. Why? Because I'm going to collect that very shortly. That's not there for the entire season. So I'm going to grow it, I'm going to yank it out, and there's no competition. There's no worry about what's going to happen with that particular plant after the fact. So if they're tiny, you know, if they have a small root ball that's just going to be at the top of the soil, not competing with the tomato, and if you're going to harvest it quickly, then why not use that space really intensely in order to get some more stuff out of it? So yes, that can depend on soil health. Yes, that can depend on the sun and all of that. But I remember the best bell peppers I've ever had in my life was when I did a long row of tomatoes, and I did tomato, pepper, 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 tomato. Thus, and this was actually, new gardeners, you need to think about this. These were in north-south rows, so that everything got early sun and everything got late sun, even if it was under the tomatoes. So those bell peppers did amazingly well. And so again, combinations there. You know, I don't think companion planting. I don't ever rely on a marigold to save my season in terms of bugs or pests, or something to make something else grow better. I think it's more about a companion is something that doesn't steal from the other, but gets the gardener what they want in terms of more produce from, for most of us, what is a small space. Does that help, or is there anything else you can think of?
That's really, really great information, and you hit the nail on the head there when you said don't have competing big-rooted plants beside the tomato or close to a tomato, because they're fighting for the food there. But
they are, and then you don't get as much food, right? So you want setting them up to fight. Any other thoughts on that, or combinations that would work for you?
No, I completely agree with what you're saying. And just making sure that your tomatoes they're at the back, you know, they're not shading anything, and to plant and to maximize your space and just plant it, you know, but like do what works for you, like what you were saying earlier.
That's true. And look, really quickly, Sam, you know, the other thing that comes to mind is that oftentimes given the does the tomato shade everything and all that, if we plant tomatoes, you know, in 2 rows or close to each other, or you know, whatever, even in 1 row, they are going to throw a lot of dense shade. However, if you separate your tomatoes more, maybe on the corners of the garden or something like that, you're going to have more sunlight. So don't create a forest.
Yeah.
You know, think about your garden design from day one and say, well, geez, what if I moved one over there or grew them, you know, diagonally across the space? Wouldn't that create more sun availability for other things? It might. So it's worth thinking about.
Absolutely. You know, we're talking a lot about raised beds and containers. Have you ever Have you ever used tomato towers, and have you ever experimented with that, Connor? I doubt you have, but I'm wondering if...
Now, is that what are we talking about? We're talking about support now, yes?
No, we're talking about a tomato tower planter. Have you used these before?
I'm sorry, that's one of the kits. That's a kit, obviously, right? Or is that hydroponic? Or I wish I had more information on that.
Have you grown tomatoes in a tower garden? Judy Joan asks.
I'm going to define tower garden as the hydroponic sort of cylindrical sort of columns that people are using these days.
I think that's what she means. Actually, there are these towers that have pockets in them.
Yeah.
Some of them are hydroponic, some are soil based.
Well, I'm not sure if it's a brand name, but what I know of that definition, yeah, that would be a small hole in a hydroponic situation. I think that would be a little tough. Am I wrong? I mean, unless you're growing a very small tomato that, you know, I mean, it's going to grow out and grow over everything else. So I don't know if it's the best use of space in a tower.
I would say it's super tough because you're going to have huge competition for a small space of soil. Do you remember the upside down tomato?
I just thought of that. That came to mind right away, and I went.
So one of the challenges with that product was, there was such a small soil base in the product that it's really hard to keep nutrients going to the plant, and you're probably going to have the same thing going on in one of those towers. It's just going to be too small a space, too much things competing, because there are many pockets in these towers. There's probably 25 or 30 pockets. And I'm going to say, have a crack at it, do it with the cherry tomato and see. A lot of gardening is about just putting something in the ground or in a pot and seeing what happens.
Well,
sometimes
again, I think
sometimes it'll lose.
No, you're right. And I think the tower is hydroponic. I think I remember that well enough. And that can certainly work. We know that with tomatoes. But I think, again, planting a huge plant, which could be a huge plant, in a tiny tower that's going to roll over everything else you've planted in the tower doesn't make any sense. So evaluate your space. That's what it's about. And we all have to evaluate the space every time we garden, whether it's the conditions or whether it's the actual square footage or whatever. Use it really intelligently. When you said tomato tower, Sam, I was immediately, I got cage or structure or like that. And we obviously haven't talked about that. What do you guys use to hold up your tomatoes? And do you hold them up?
Mm-hmm. Cages.
Yeah, tomato cages are the easiest, simplest way of doing things. I mean, just you stick it in the ground and let it do its thing. But I've got creative, when I was living in Michigan, my tomato plants got, upwards of 10 feet tall. They were just so big.
Wow.
And we created supports with lodge poles and branches and created a whole box and had them strung up with nylon pantyhose and different things. So that's the beauty.
Sam, did you have your washing on those tomatoes as well?
Yeah, exactly. It's a great inexpensive solution for tying up your...
One of the things I wanted to say here about the cages is the tomato cages, most of the ones we have here are around about 5 or 6 feet tall. I believe they're 5 or 6 feet tall. But they're super important for the first maybe 2 months of the plant while it grows to give it structure. But what happens is they tend to outgrow the cage after time.
Well, yeah.
So what I do in the yard is I tie the branches back up to the cage with some string so that the branches don't bend over like this. And it's a pretty effective way of doing it.
Yeah, you don't want to get a crease in the branch if you can avoid it. That's for sure. And
what are you doing there, Sam?
What's that?
Sorry.
What are you doing there, Sam?
I'm so sorry. The viewers can't see me right now, but my cat has killed a snake and brought it behind me. And it's still alive, and so I'm up just trying to avoid a snake being thrown in my lap from my cat. So
safety first, Sam.
That's always. This home life can be dangerous.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I think it's fun. I think it's fun to think about different ways to support a tomato, and I hope that everybody will take this advantage while you're home. Look around, find something super creative and interesting. All it has to be is strong. That's all. That's all a tomato stake or a tomato control, whatever, has to be. It just has to hold up under the weight of big tomatoes at the end of the summer. So whether it's metal, whether it's, oh gosh, we've experimented and have fun with so many things. As long as you can tie it up, Conor. And I love your idea about, if a cage is whatever, this big, 15, 12, 15, 18 inches across, you're going to get more plant than that. So allowing some of the plant to come outside of the cage and then harnessing it back to the cage is brilliant. Then you're not just squeezing it all into, a square foot or whatever it is. Not always a good idea. So I think, again, as your plant begins to grow, get a stage or a stake or something in there sooner rather than later. You have a fence, attach it to a fence. Beautiful. Why not? Good gosh.
If I can say one thing here, and I'm a total victim of this, I'm a total perpetrator of this crime myself, is when you plant your tomato, put the cage in immediately. Because what will happen is 3 weeks will pass, the plant will get big, and you cannot retrofit a tomato plant into a cage because the stems are so brittle. The branches are It can be very hard to do.
It can be very hard to do that without damaging your plant.
I've been crying in my garden trying to retrofit tomatoes. Oh, no, that huge branch with all the flowers, I broke it.
No,
so immediately when you plant, put the cage on the plant.
Everybody at home needs to walk around your garden and figure out where else you could grow a tomato that has an available support near it, whether it's a column or a garden arch or whatever. I love growing on grids. I love growing on hog wire where you can basically espalier a tomato across it. This is all beautiful stuff. So for everybody who wondered, like, oh, I don't have any more space for tomatoes, walk around your garden, figure out what fence, what pole, whatever could harness a tomato. And you know what? It works, and it's fine. All you got to do is hold them up. I did one year, you guys. I had some cherries, and tomatoes genetically are hardwired to run across a hill. That's what the early ancestors of tomatoes did, right? They just were wild and out there. And one year I did cherry tomatoes in big sort of piles or pods that were like 10 by 10. And when they got to about 1.5 feet tall, I cut the tops off of them so they would have lots of side growth, or let the side growth grow. And they made this big bundle and just kind of rolled everywhere. And it was the biggest mess I've ever seen in my life of tomatoes. I hardly picked from them. So it's not a great idea to let them just run everywhere, because actually, Sam, one of my worries since I lived in Ohio is that it became a snake fest. And I've got this big bundle of plant. What am I going to do? Jump in there and try to pick with snakes everywhere? I don't know. So,
Sam, are you okay over there?
It's a timely.
Matt has a half-dead snake in her yard right now.
Tell me what kind it is. That's fucking critical.
I'm fine.
We're watching like Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom.
I know. Movie. Well, actually, that segues into a next question that we've been getting from a lot of customers is pests. What are some of your solutions? How do you keep the animals from digging up your new veggies? Asked Darby. What keeps squirrels away? Asked Chris Booker. These are questions that we get all the time in the nursery, and tomatoes are a favorite of squirrels. Is what we're really learning.
Yeah, nothing could be sadder and more true. It's true. They love it. Everything loves it. I got video of my Australian Shepherd eating cherry tomatoes off a plant. So it's not always a squirrel. So you can defend in many cases only if you defend completely, and that means wiring. That means enclosing the plant in wire. Whether that's a greenhouse-sized, pavilion where you have or arbor or whatever that's all wired up, or whether it's a little things or smaller things over a particular plant. It's really the only way to do it. I have ground squirrels. I have chipmunks. We have even gophers will come out and mess with the bases of tomato plants. So enclose. And I know that's difficult. It's not. That doesn't come with a wow. This will be easy. Comment at all. You have to. I mean,
if you can't enclose, if you're in a situation where you can't do it. What we found has been very effective is coyote urine, especially in this area because there's a lot of coyotes.
Love that.
And what happens is the possums and the raccoons, they're diggers. They're looking for worms and grubs. They're not really interested in your plants.
Right.
But what they'll do is they'll tear the whole place up. But if you put down some coyote urine in 5 or 6 places around where they would normally come, it usually deters them from coming. Issue with it is you've got to kind of be diligent about doing it every 4 or 5 days.
You absolutely must.
The other thing I've had some success with is cayenne pepper for squirrels, because it burns them like it would burn us. And if you get a flower duster and dust it all around the plant, or what you can do is make a preparation with soap, water, cayenne pepper, spray it on the tomatoes, and it creates heat on the tomatoes. It doesn't damage the plant at all, but the squirrels don't like it. Only caveat there is you better be washing those tomatoes very well when you pick them to eat.
Or like spiced food, one or the other, right?
Yeah.
Well, listen, I think we've tried just about everything, and this is a survival. This is survival for these critters. It's bottom line.
There.
This is what they're after. So enclose when you can. I know that's difficult. I've seen people do everything from enclose an old swing set to enclose a small a greenhouse frame to fancy things where everything's all it really is what's happening. I'm trapping. Yes, I use deterrents or that kind of thing if I can.
No poison, please, everyone. No poison.
Not using.
Mark Donofrio comment, does the cat get gophers? And if so, is it for sale? Which brings a point one of Conor always says to customers is the best thing you can do is to get a cat.
The best pesticide is buy a cat.
Gotta love that. And dogs do a pretty good job too if they're not digging your tomatoes up. I've heard that. And listen, if you do have pests or whatever that are digging under your tomatoes, wire might also be the recommended solution. Oftentimes I'll cut a wire collar out of hardware cloth, cut a slit in it, slide it right around the base of your tomatoes and attach it. Thus, digging doesn't happen. They can't dig down or it's uncomfortable, and then they can't get through the wire to do that. So there's always a way to do it. Wire is generally the answer. It's not easy, but you have to be diligent about it too. To your point, it doesn't work. One-time applications of anything won't work. So know what you got, know how to defend against it, and if you're me in Ojai this year, up in my container trials, which used to be in exposed areas near pastures where squirrels would just hike right up and take 50% of the crop. Now they're inside where the dogs are. So yes, your pets can be helpful, and all those containers are now inside the dog yard. I don't think I'm going to have squirrel issues this year, at least not there. So it's a tough.
You have the full spectrum of wildlife up there.
I get everything.
Kathleen Rogers, I've never heard this before. She says, I put bubble wrap on the top of my 3 feet high raised beds. The squirrels don't like the popping noise. Interesting.
Okay, I like it.
That's correct.
Look, do what works.
We're going to have bubble wrap at the nursery next week.
Yeah, that'll be the next thing.
Well, guys, birds often get tomatoes, but I don't think they're after tomatoes. They're often after the moisture. But I used those crazy eyeball balloon things in our kitchen garden a few years ago, thinking, oh, this will never work. It actually does. So again, there's another something to try every time you turn around.
Absolutely. So let's get to some fun stuff. Not that this conversation hasn't been really fun, but I think the really fun part about tomatoes are the varieties and the selections. You have your tomato maniacs who, know these are my favorite varieties and they understand. But for a new grower, like when I'm speaking to some of my friends who, haven't ever dived into gardening, when I tell them that there are hundreds and hundreds of varieties of tomatoes, they're just mind blown. Or when I tell them, they say, what is Tomatomania? And I say, we have over 100 varieties of tomatoes here. And they're like, what? I can't believe this. So then the next question is, where do I begin? And the question of, I'm looking for a tomato, a good salad snacking tomato that does well on the coast, or you get so many specifics when you get a tomato question. And then also just a general, like, what tomato what's your favorite tomato? I mean, it's an impossible question.
The impossible question.
It is, it's so impossible. But let's talk about what are some of your favorite varieties. We can all answer that, whether it's, some smaller varieties, some big guys, some new exciting ones, maybe some seeds that you've found and dug up from the vaults that you're very excited about. Yes.
Well, look, there's always a lot of fun stuff going on with Tomatomania every year. And yes, it's our job to go out there, and now we're trialing, or testing. But we have to go out and find new things that are exciting. And yes, those new gardeners that we're talking about who think 100 tomatoes is a lot need to know that, there's almost 7,000-8,000 out there that we can get seed for in order to introduce to home gardeners all over the place. Mm-hmm. So it's really exciting, and there's so much there. And Sam, to your point about, people not knowing what to grow, that part's easy, right? In terms of a strategy, what do you want to eat? I mean, that's how easy it is. What do you want to eat? They're all going to be good, or they're all going to be different, but they'll all be good and they'll be fresh and they'll be healthy, and we love that. But what do you want? Do you want only cherry tomatoes? Is that your thing? Awesome. Do you only want end of season tomatoes? Big, beefy, late, heirloom beefsteaks? All good. Again, your garden, you get to do exactly what you want in it.
Scott,
I'll recommend you do a little bit of all of that. But
I'm getting the feeling here that you find it hard to choose between your children.
Well, of course you do. Of course you do. Well, look, I always say at Tomatomania, look, go look at these pictures, soak up this information that's out there in the information about the particular varieties, and fall in love. That's all. It's just, you just have to fall in love. And people do. and then those become old favorites. And each year, yes, you bounce out and you do new things. But what do you want to eat? Put it in the garden. That's how your garden is most relevant to you. And yes, I think if my tomato strategy, I want a lot of tomatoes, but I also want early, mid-season, and late. You can figure that out. When people come to see you, you know how to guide them on that. We know how to guide them on that. And yeah, I want to be the first one in the neighborhood with tomatoes and the last one. And along the way, I want big ones and little ones and red ones and stripy ones and blue ones and all the rest. And that's what's exciting about the season. So there are infinite possibilities. This year, I'm finding myself going back to old favorites. I think it's one of those years where we want that. It's like comfort food. In terms of, it's like, I want to see my friends in the garden. And so I have a lot of old faves that I haven't grown in years. Cherokee Purple, Jean Flan, what else? Juliet's. Can't get enough of that tomato. On and on and on. I mean, I planted one called Socolates yesterday. That's a Latvian heirloom that we found about 3 years ago that I adore, and it didn't do well last year. So I want it back, right? I want those things that I know. And then, Sam, in terms of the new stuff, we always stretch out. There are new blue tomatoes, those with the anthocyanin that cause a blue collar or a blue striping and make a tomato so interesting and wonderful. There's one called Great White Blues that I will grow this year. We grew it last year at the starter farm in Santa Ynez at one of our Tomatomania test gardens, and it was great, really, really nice. I want to see it in my garden this year. There's a new blue, a green base with blue stripes called Kryptonite. How could you pass that tomato up? Have to grow that one, right? What other ones? They come from all over the world, so we try to get a smattering of this and that. There's a Honduran tomato called Puerto Cortez that isn't that sound great? I can't wait to see this tomato. You know how you, and good gardeners who've done tomatoes for a while, the quality, or not the quality, the character of a tomato, even the little plant, is very different. Each variety can be very different. The leaf is wider or greener or more wiry or shaped differently or whatever. So there's great variation between the actual foliage of a tomato. Well, this is one that I saw for the first time when it came out of the greenhouse, and it just looked good enough to eat, kind of thing, Puerto Cortez was. And I said, I just so have to grow this tomato because that's all. It's just over with. I have to know what comes out of that beautiful plant. So there are many things about a tomato that we can appreciate, and it does start with the plants. It starts with the name. It starts with the history. It starts with the stories about these things. And that's what Tomatomania tries to do, is broaden that for everyone. And I think we succeed.
Tell us a little bit about the taste testing that we did here last year, the ones you did.
We had such fun. Go, Sam.
Yeah, I'll do a little plug on that. Last year we did a tomato happy hour where we had everybody bring in one or two or three or four varieties of tomatoes from their garden. We laid them all out on a table and had everybody try them. It was
60, 70
It was so
varieties.
Wonderful, and we've really been promoting that to happen this year because it's a great way for you to pre-select the varieties that you want to grow for the following season. Because it is. I mean, we knew from that we're like, absolutely have to have the Thornberry terracotta in the garden. What was the other one that you loved? The Carbon.
Carbon was fantastic.
Yeah, beautiful.
The Black Crim is always a fantastic one. Black Seaman is a fantastic one. I mean, if I can make a little tip to first-time growers, if you want, I think what you should do when you're growing for the first time is pick a variety that produces a lot of fruit easily, and they would be Jean Flamme, Stupichka, Scott, can you give me one more?
Sun Gold.
Oh, God. Well, there's 100 of them. And cherry, how's that? Yeah, and you bring up a really good point. I'm just a little off, but in terms of a first-time gardener and what to grow, the idea that you get a lot of tomatoes makes you successful, right? So when you're choosing, if somebody asks me that, I'll choose a smaller tomato. You get more. You're going to get more cherries than you're going to get of a beefsteak. So oftentimes people think, well, geez, I grew these huge tomatoes, but I only got 3. I did terribly. And we go, well, sometimes that's really good on a big late season tomato, right? If you get 3. So if you're a new gardener, know that a smaller tomato produces more, not necessarily earlier, but often that works too. And so choose for smallish. You'll just flat get more tomatoes on kitchen counter. And
well, the other great thing about the cherry tomatoes is in Southern California where we are, the cherries will grow right through December. And when a lot of the bush tomatoes are done by September, the cherries they're the Duracell bunny of tomatoes. They just keep going.
Thankfully, in our season, there were a lot like that. And hopefully there are some people tuned in from other places today. And we know that everybody doesn't have that kind of a season. But yeah, we get a really long season in Southern California, as does much of the South. They'll have a second season in the fall, right, where they can come back into the garden and make it go. So there are tons of varieties out there. There are tons of options. Again, what do you want to eat and what's your strategy? And lots of people, you have to have a tomato strategy. And I say, well, you don't have to, but it helps, as with most things in life, right? And we want you to get what you want, and that's when it's a good season.
There's a few. I just want to share a couple of the listeners of their favorite varieties. Black Cherokee, Maya. Mickey loves the green zebras. I love the green zebras as well. They're so good.
Good. If again, new growers, if you're not familiar with the greens, any green tomato just has a zestier, tangier taste that's really different, and it's great in salads because it brightens them up in a different way than you've ever had it happen before. What else, Sam?
James Carter loves the Nebraska Wedding, and Paul Robeson.
Wow.
Paul Robeson, great tomato. It's because it's smoky and salty as opposed to citrusy and sweet.
Yep.
Really interesting tomato.
Shelley says the Amazon chocolate is one of the
nice. Look at all these great varieties people are growing. This is exciting for me to know that people are going way off the mark and finding Nebraska Wedding and Amazon chocolate, and they work and they're beautiful and delicious, and that's just very exciting for me. Keep going. What else?
Yeah.
What else are they saying out there?
Brandywine, Lava Flow, Green Frosted,
Yay.
San Marzano. We've got some good ones. And then I also have a question from Judy Jones. Can we buy seeds from Tomatomania?
Tomatomania has never done seeds. Now, that may change this year. Let me plug that, right? We have never done seeds before. We have talked for years about offering seed collections, which would allow us to do seed providing in a very different way. So stay tuned on that one.
Okay.
We'd like to do things, so not only is it not necessary, but it's a little late, especially for our later, sales during the season, to be selling tomato seeds. But we would love to, and we will try. And again, look for some Tomatomania collections coming out, next fall that will allow you to get fewer seeds, multiple varieties, and fill your garden with all these stripes and great shapes and all this stuff that we're talking about. Because there's so many great stuff, so many great things out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're getting a couple more questions. I know we already discussed this in the beginning a little bit, but about this flower, I just want to touch one more time on the flower question, because one of the questions we got was, I have tons of flowers and I'm not really I'm not getting many fruits. I know we discussed it could be a heat issue, it could be many, but until what point do you think you should be pinching the flowers off, and why do you think that she could not be getting fruits with high flower content? Does that make sense? Okay.
Well, of course, yeah. It's something that we see a lot of, and it could be because it was hot yesterday. That's one of environmentally you have issues that can affect flower production and flower stability, or the flower actually becoming a fruit. Again, it's necessary to go back to the basics and say that your soil quality and health, the application of water and irrigation, how you're applying fertilizer, all can make a difference there. So make sure that's on point. Make sure that that's all happening and happening correctly. After that, it can be 100 things. It scientifically, and I'm not a horticulturist, I'm not a botanist, so I'm going to gloss over this really quickly, but try to let you know that many of the heirlooms, for instance, have a lot of cavities in them, and they're filled with gel, and then they're filled with seeds. But it's not an orderly situation. You with me on this? A lot of the modern tomatoes, you cut through and you can see these well-organized cavities of seeds, and generally there are fewer of them. I hope if botanist friends are listening, they're not gonna slap me about this. But when a tomato pollinates, it has to pollinate each of the cavities in a tomato. Thus, it's harder to pollinate a brandywine, which has lots of cavities. Got me? You with me on this one? Mm-hmm. And easier to pollinate a tomato that has fewer cavities. That's one of the things that, and there's a name for that, but I won't come up with it. That's one of the things that hybridizers did to make tomatoes more productive in the field. So, yes, you're growing a big heirloom tomato, beefsteak type, you may have more trouble with pollination. That's just how it goes. Brandywine, unfortunately, in Southern California is famous for that, not giving us many fruits. It is a huge and great producer elsewhere, and we're very jealous about that. So you have to. It depends on all the basics. It depends on what tomato you're growing, and then outside of the basics, it depends whether it was windy or hot or cold yesterday. Sometimes the plant just says, "I am not ready to. This flower is not ready. This just can't happen," and the plant drops it. Backing up just a little bit, don't pinch any more flowers. Don't. If you put a plant in the ground and you pinch a flower or a set of flowers or whatever it was, that's fine. The plant can develop and set up roots and all that. But early tomatoes are flowering like crazy right now. So for goodness sakes, especially if you planted early tomatoes, don't be pulling all the flowers off them. Let them go. The plant will decide. And often, as this participant mentions, they don't give us as much as we want. So sometimes they cooperate, sometimes they don't. It could be everything environmental, or it can be those things that we can control. Do your part, control what you can. The rest of it happens or it doesn't. So
and also remember that it's the rule of fruits. Is people ask us a lot about the fruit trees as well. That not all flowers will produce a fruit, just like not all kisses will produce a marriage. And so you have to be able to. You have to be able to be patient with what grows and what sets fruit and what doesn't.
Yes, exactly. So yes, but again, and Sam, we talked about this week. People do have to watch flowers. You got to get crazy about this. If all your flowers are turning brown and fizzling up, something's wrong. There's something that's amiss. And again, you may or may not be able to control it, but do what you can to control what you can. And you need to know that there's a flower and there it is, and let me see if there's a little green ball developing there at the end where that yellow flower was. You need to know that. So watch them. The flower can be kind of insignificant at the beginning of the season. Some have huge flowers. Some have really teeny flowers. So watch them. I have people who mark flower stems, like we'll tie little red things around flower stems so they know where to look. I mean, I don't go to that length, but there you are. Watch your flowers and make sure that it's turning into fruit, because it's a signal that something can be amiss.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I mean, we could talk for hours and hours on this one. Absolutely. And Janet Lee had the question, will I be able to watch after the fact? And yes, this entire conversation will be available on both Facebook and YouTube, on Fig Earth Supplies pages as well as Tomatomania pages. So you can rewatch as to your heart's desire and take notes and ask more questions, and we're always available for you here. Did you have anything else that you really wanted to discuss, or something maybe you thought that we didn't talk? I don't think, Conor, that we got to hear what was growing in your garden this season for tomato plants.
Okay, so of course I went straight for the taste test winners. I have Hornworms terracotta. I have Carbon. That was an outstanding tomato. I mean, what blew me away about the Carbon was after you've tasted 20 tomatoes, you're kind of like just tasting tomatoes. But this one was wow, and that was really incredible. So I'm really excited about that one. I always grow some cherries, so I have green frosted doctors, and I have some sun gold. I love Black Seaman. It's a fantastic tomato. I'm growing that. I have some green zebra. And this year, I've started to grow a lot more in containers because in the past years, in certain parts of my garden, it's very prone to spider mites. And usually, if you have a persistent problem like that, you should grow your tomatoes in another place and let that grow different things in that place for maybe 2 or 3 years.
That's a great point, Conor. And I love the fact that you're doing more containers. A lot of people are, and it's a great. People apologize.
I just want more tomatoes.
Yeah. Well, exactly. People apologize all the time for having to grow in containers, and I go, why? That's a great way to grow containers. Are you growing larger tomatoes in containers or smaller, or do you choose that way?
I'm growing larger tomatoes in containers. We have a 25-gallon bag here.
Okay, that's big.
25-gallon bag, the Smart Pot, and it fits about 2 bags of soil. And for me, that's kind of like the minimum size I would do, is enough that would fit two 1.5 cubic foot bags of soil. I use recipe 420 because it has 18 weeks growing nutrients in it.
Interesting.
Almost the entirety of the lifespan of the plant. And we had great results in the nursery in our grow bags last year, Sam, huh?
Well, I'm going to...
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about spider mites, and that was actually a question from Victor was, you know, I know we are segueing out, but then also getting into spider mites, but do you have any tips or varieties that are maybe more prone, like disease resistant, that you can talk about?
Well, listen, and if I can jump back just for a second, I asked Conor about does he grow larger or smaller tomatoes in a pot, and so the first thing that comes up in my mind is that I generally will grow smaller and earlier tomatoes in a pot because we get so hot that expecting a big tomato to make it through 4 months in a pot before I get fruit is really it's kind of like unimaginable. And I get a little lazy too, is the truth of it all. And so by the end of the season, the plants don't get what they need, and then I don't get what I need, and nobody's happy. So containers, I'll generally do smaller tomatoes and earlier tomatoes, so I can have them, they're done, and then it gets super hot, and I'll concentrate on the ones in the ground. So just a note on that. Sam, spider mites, you know what? This is a tough one, and it's becoming more of a problem, I think, for us in Southern California. Generally, it happens when it's super hot. I know that last year for many people it happened earlier than that, so I think we're going to see it. Spider mites want hot and dry. Now, and I'm sorry, I glossed over one other thing too. Which variety? I don't think spider mites is about what variety of a plant it is. Anything that's going to land on a plant, yes, pests will often go to a plant that's ailing before they'll go to a healthy plant. But at the end of the season, if you've got and this is when it's happening, at the end of the season, if you've got everything growing well and they've survived well to that point, I don't think it's about a variety. I think it's about condition. And spider mites want it hot and dry. When you have a full, thick plant and you live in a hot space like I do, right, you're creating lots of shelter for spider mites to live in a hot, dry place. So, unfortunately, even in hot locales, it might help you to pinch or prune a little bit more and maybe offer some shade another way so that your fruit isn't sun scalded, but that you, again, don't make a spider mite house, and that can help. So spreading out your plants. Instead of planting them 3 feet apart, plant them further apart, use the 6-foot rule. If you can do it, it's a really good idea. Then the mites don't get your entire collection all at once. They might appear here and then not there, so that you can deal with it on one plant before everybody gets affected. There are absolutely miticides. They're out there, both organic and synthetic. So get one, use it. When you start. Here's the other thing about spider mites: it happens so fast that if you're not looking for it, a leaf starts to turn yellow. Look underneath, look around, whatever. If leaves appear dry and crackly toward the end of the season, or you in 3 days you're going to have a red fog all over that plant because they'll be so numerous. So use a miticide. The other thing too is they want it hot and dry. Wet your plants, wet them. Ojai, Southern California. We're hot and dusty, and you know what? The air isn't, we got some pollution out there, all that. I like to wet my plants. Early in the season, I don't think it's a great idea, and we all hear, don't get your plants wet and all that. You know what? End of season, I'm spraying them with water. I don't want to create a space that spider mites like, so I'm getting in there and I'm effectively washing the plants off. I think they get some relief. I think they can, their leaves work better because they don't have a bunch of dust and everything else all over them, and spider mites won't like that as much. So with every pest like that, there is a logical sort of path to at least limiting their effect in the garden if you can't solve the problem. And I think that separation thing, which we obviously are hearing a lot about right now, is one of those things that helps with a lot of pests. And so spread your plants out. That can help.
Just a quick interjection here. I say to people all the time is, the reason you should pay attention to your plants daily is you can catch things early.
Thank you, of course.
If you don't catch things early, you pretty much have no chance of saving yourself.
Again, like most
things. Pay attention early, and then you can take action. I've had pretty good results with neem oil, with spider mites. My issue last year was I didn't do it often enough. and then they just eventually took hold of the plants, and I was like, oh, no.
Well, you gotta watch neem oil in the heat of summer because you're spraying oil on your plants.
Only in the evening.
So make sure that that's huge. You got to watch that. So, but again, it works, and it's only one of the things that do. So there are specific things that can solve this problem for you. You just have to anticipate and know that if you had the issue last year, you're probably going to have the issue this year. Conor, do you spray the rest of your garden? Because I think this is another thing that new gardeners might also benefit from. What I mean by the rest of the garden is oftentimes we'll spray a tomato plant with something that we want, like a preventative or whatever. But you know what? Those pests also live around your garden. So whether it's whiteflies or snails or whatever it is, because a snail can ruin a tomato, lots of snails can ruin a tomato season. Know that treat the garden as a whole. Treat the surrounding area so that you are not only doing this one little spot where, because they're everywhere else, you're going to forget to spray next week, for instance, right? Boom, there they are again. So you might use a wider lens to address a situation like that.
That's a really good point, and I wish I could say that I do that, but I'm going to be doing it from now on.
Well, it's more product, it's more time, it's all that, and we're liable to let that go. So it's a good thing to remember.
That's a great point.
Absolutely. Well, I think that, I'm going to answer this question. Pat Chu, I don't know if she just chimed in, but she had the question, can you plant new tomatoes in the same pot as last year? Do you need to rotate crops? And yes, you can, but you need to be amending your soil between seasons no matter what you're growing, especially with tomatoes. They're such heavy eaters, and they really need that soil to be replenished with all of the nutrients that were sucked out from the previous season.
That's a good point, because what I do is I empty out the pot completely and put brand new soil in it. And I'll use the soil that was in the pot for something else.
Bingo.
I'll amend it and use it for a winter crop.
I like that.
Or use definitely refill your pots with brand new soil every tomato season.
It's a great idea, you guys. It truly is. And if I guess one of the words that we have to think of, and again, especially for new gardeners, in terms of a tomato garden or any garden, is balance. And it's what you want in balance. Balance in water. Balance in fertilizer means you're fertilizing on a schedule. Balance in water means it's never too dry, it's never too wet. You're giving it's Goldilocks, just right, correct? And this happens in every part of the garden and all of that. So whether it's application of disease preventive, all of that stuff, it's balanced. So you're in your I'm getting a little off the track here, but balancing heat, it's just all about that. And so know that in every question and all this, it's all about balance and consistency and like that, and that's when your plants are going to do the best.
A little bit of attention all the time.
Yep.
All right. Well, do you guys have any other things you wanted to discuss or questions maybe you had for me or one another or anything?
Gosh. Well, look, you guys, I do want to talk about your tasting again because that was super fun, and I hope everybody will remember and come do it this year because there's nothing – we can do everything else but give you something – we can do everything but here, taste this and see if you want to grow this next year.
Exactly.
You guys will provide hopefully if we can do this by that time in our year, right? You guys will provide an opportunity where people can actually come and go, wow, I want to grow that. And you can read and you can look at directions, but there's absolutely nothing like it. And it's fun. It's fun as heck. So we hope, we hope we can do it. We hope that we can we'll be able to share some of what we're doing. It's a great show and tell, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. We hope that we can do it too, and we have high expectations of everybody's tomatoes this year with all the time and energy they're putting into the gardens this season. So
we had our biggest ever tomato mania here this year.
Such good news.
I was hoping and praying that we can get to taste. I think we had more than 100 varieties this year, Scott.
It's very exciting. I'd love to see that growth, and it'll go nowhere but up as everybody gets excited about gardening and being back in it and wants more variety and all of that. And added to all the other good products that you provide and the good counsel of you two and the rest, it makes for a really winning combination for gardeners that you deal with. So we're all thankful.
Thank you, Scott.
And we're grateful for the king of tomatoes also.
Much appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you to everybody for tuning in. We had some really great questions and really great viewership. So, we are available via email is best if you ever have any more questions, and as well as Scott. And we hope everyone's staying safe and healthy at home.
Yes, do it. Thank you guys. I really appreciate the time and all of your energy for this. It's great.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
thanks everyone for watching.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Go garden.
Bye.